1st. And so that was a complete gut renovation, which we got the go-ahead for in about March of that year. So this project had somewhat languished. So as of March of last year, the director of technology at the law school and I start meeting with various multimedia consultants, telling them what kinds of things we wanted in a computer lab, and oh, by the way, it has to be ready by November 1st. What we found out was that the salesmen were quite good at saying, sure, that's fine. We picked a consultant group that came up with recommendations about the equipment and everything. Then when we started actually meeting with the installers, they almost died when they found out that the drop-dead completion date was November 1st. But that's what I found out during that time, was that there was a lot of terminology that the consultants threw around that I wasn't really familiar with. I wasn't sure if I needed to know about it. Later on I found out I probably should have. And so that was part of the impetus for this course, is to look at the things I wish I would have known before I started talking to consultants. The topic for today is why train law students and why a training room. Now, I mean, we could have a discussion, decide that we don't need training rooms, and then we can all just leave early. Get out to Saks, or out in the nice weather. As I recall, last time I was in Chicago, there was a heat wave going on, and it was nice to be in the air-conditioned room. But today it's really nice being outside. Physical arrangement and orientation of the training room. Then, like I say, what do these terms mean when people start throwing out the terms? And then more about projectors and screens than you ever wanted to know. I started to call this title Firewire, but that would be more of an inside joke. When the director of technology and I were meeting with one of these consultants, and the guy was explaining the various projectors and type of systems, our ITD director asked about, well, does it have a firewire connector? And the guy sort of stumbled a little bit and said he wasn't really sure if it had a firewire connector. And you sort of got the idea that he really didn't know what the connector was. And so then after we left, the ITD director said, well, he didn't even know what firewire was. How could he possibly know anything about AV? So I thought that wasn't a good time to ask him, by the way, what is firewire? Which for those who it's a standard. You've got the IEEE number there, connection standard for video. It's somewhat sort of the video equivalent of the USB, in that you can connect and disconnect video rather rapidly. For those who want to know what firewire was. Okay, why train law students? Well, why I'm interested in training law students is that they need to know how to log into our network. They need to know how to use the email system that we have. We also have class discussion lists. They need to know how to log onto those and use those. We're in downtown Los Angeles, so many of our students want to access things that we put up on the web and other places from home. And particularly for items that we offer in the library and other places, you've got to configure your browser in certain ways to connect with those. You've also got to understand when to log in and what type of login to use. ExamSoft, getting people up and running on ExamSoft, as well as the commercial legal databases that most everyone offers training on, and something that libraries talk somewhat about, less so in law libraries, bibliographic instruction, but that is something that you might want to train people on. Tools for law student training. This is something I've always kept around. What you need. I just pressed the wrong button. What do you need? A gun and a chair. Basic tools for training law students. Now, actually, we've got another question. Do the law students want training? I mean, our experience is that, why do we have to have mandatory training? Because, I mean, in many ways, that's the only way we can get them into training, and say it's mandatory. So, maybe we should start rethinking, do they really want training? One of my main jobs is taking care of the computer lab, and so you always get I just need to print this document. I haven't used the computers on campus for 2 years. I just need to print this document. And then they come back and say, why doesn't it look right? At home it was 10 pages, now it's 12. It's too long. Maybe if they had a little more understanding about printers and about the way that the particular computers are set up in the lab, that they wouldn't have quite so many questions. Another one, why doesn't email work? Well, email doesn't work because you're pressing the wrong button. And maybe a little training would make my job easier. Of course, this morning on the keynote session, talking about training just in time, maybe that's what we should do, is that when they have a problem with the email, then we show them how to use it right. Because frankly, when we do the mass sessions at the beginning of the semester trying to show them how to use email, half of them don't listen. So why a training room? Obviously, if you've got a computer lab, you've got to set up, you could do training in the computer lab. One of the problems I see with that is that, of course, you have to chase the students out of the computer lab when there's a training class.
That's what the whip and chair is for.
Yeah. And the gun if necessary. But now also you can have specialized equipment like smart boards. Well, we've got one of our training rooms has a smart board in it. I don't really care about having students in there doing just their regular word processing. So it's nice that we can have a training room that is separate from the regular computer lab. The other thing is that at Loyola, we used to have a staff training room, staff and faculty training room. One of the things we did with the library coming up with new training rooms is that staff and faculty training also takes place in the library computer labs. It makes it nice and centralized, but again, you want to have, for our network, those computers are set up differently than the student computers. And so it's nice that we've got a training room that we can keep locked. This is, again, as I said, my point for all this came about because of the information that I was digging around trying to, when we were remodeling the library. This is the computer training facility we have. It's a total of 88 computers. We've got the best floor plan I could find that showed the most accurate representation is the one that the architects used for installing the furniture. So all those little numbers were the codes to the furniture people about what that exact piece of furniture was. So it's a little bit busy. But we have 2 training rooms of 12 computers each, and then 1 training room of 24. And then what we call just the sort of general computer lab, the open area, but it's also equipped with projection and screens that come down on the ceiling, so we could in fact use all 88 computers for training, should we want to train 88 people at one time, which I actually said I would do, so that we can do the first year orientation, network, and email training section by section. Our sections run about 80 people, and so that way we can just say, section 1, this is when you show up to get your network account and your email. Talking a little bit about mistakes I made, problems I see we could have thought about, or other options we could have done. I've got 2 training rooms the same size. Why do I have 2 training rooms the same size? Because when I was thinking all this up, I was thinking in terms of a Westlaw training room and a Lexis training room. After plans had gotten too finalized to make any changes, it occurred to me, I don't want a Westlaw training room. I don't want a Lexis training room. They're my training rooms. Westlaw and Lexis will give whatever room is appropriate for what they're doing. So we've got display racks and stuff all over the lab where they can put up their materials, and we've got the Westlaw and Lexis printers out in the main room with all the other printers, so they're easy to get to. So I could have actually had a better design if I had been thinking in terms of these 2 rooms have to be almost as identical as possible. Another thing that could have been done there's a solid wall between the two rooms. It couldn't have a folding wall. And that way you could have two 12 workstation rooms or 124. Actually, I was involved in doing a computer lab at the University of Texas, training room there, and that's what we did. And that was 1990. And in $1990, it was $10,000 extra to put in a folding wall rather than a solid wall. I don't know what Los Angeles construction cost would have been, probably about $15,000 more. And since I had the space, I said, well, I'll just go ahead and have solid walls, and we have a 24 workstation training room, so the larger classes can go in there, smaller classes can go in the other one. But certainly that's an option that especially, we were going from a computer lab of 12 workstations, and then a Westall training room and a Lexus training room. So that the fact that we now had, if I close off the two 12-student rooms, I've still got over 60 computers. That's more than students had before. So the thinking was that, well, we can afford to do separate rooms simply because we're such a tremendous increase in the number of workstations that we're doing. Okay, let's talk about room orientation problems and what I discovered. First off, you've got to think about how do you want the room set up. You want to construct the, and of course, fortunately this is a very high ceiling, so I can have the instructor in the middle and my screen in the middle. But typically in a smaller training room, your screen is not going to be this high. So do you want the screen in the middle and the instructor off to the side, or do you want the screen off to the side and the instructor in the middle? I went with the screen in the middle because I was thinking in terms of these are, computer training rooms, technology training rooms. You really want to get the people focused on what's on the screen, what's going on, and less onto what the instructor is doing or saying. Hopefully you'll be following along, and so it's more important to see than it is to be looking at the instructor. Should the entry be in the front or the back? This room, you see the entry is in the front. Actually, I wanted the room turned around. I wanted the seats facing the other way so that you would walk into the back of the room. That way latecomers don't disrupt things. But because of this was a renovation project, and it happens that right through about the back 5 feet of this room, the ceiling drops by about a foot because there's air conditioning duct work and everything else that needs to go through there. So that the screen would have to be too low. You want the screen, let's say for a room that's flat, you want the bottom of the screen, if you can, to be at least 4 feet off the ground so that people can see over. And with the lower ceiling, that wasn't going to be possible, so we had to have the room face the front. That led to another problem dealing with lights. Obviously, what we wanted to do was to dim the lights, but at least in Los Angeles building code, you cannot turn off all the lights. There has to be at least one light on over the door. Well, the door is right next to the screen, so basically when we first moved into the room, the architects had just left the whole row of front lights on. We at least rearranged the lights, and it was just one small panel of lights over this one door. The lower door here is the entrance door. The other door goes into the storeroom. But that was something that, again, if we could just face the room the other way, we wouldn't have had a problem. Another thing to think about on the location is ingress and egress. That is, on this one, you see one aisle down the side. That gives you a nice wide aisle, but the problem is that means that somebody is when the person against the wall is 3 chairs away from the aisle. Have to crawl over people to get in and out. The other thing dealing with, again, the orientation of the room is that you want, in the front of the room, you want a little bit more space. First off, so that the front row is not flat against the screen. And secondly, some instructors like to move around. and you want to give them a little bit of room up there. At least with the door also in the front, you also need an extra space for people to get in and out. So at least the space is being used for two purposes. You've got a space to get people in and out, plus it's an extra space at the front of the room that you want to provide the distance from the screen plus room for the instructor to move around.
Do you not consider the possibility of the instructor wandering around behind students and looking at their screens and playing with the keyboards?
That's very good. And so that's somewhat difficult in this because you got the one, and just as I said, if you want to go look at the screen on the person next to the wall, you got to crawl over 3 people to see them. So you could do the aisle down the middle. Much easier just for what you said, because this is really great for the instructor because it's really easy to get back here. You can see both screens. You can practically lean over and get to the other person. One problem, of course, is that the place that's got the best view is in the aisle because that's what's lined up on the screen. So you sort of lose the prime real estate because that's where your aisle is. Also, if you have to use your training room as a computer lab, and I think most people have to, this is much better for a computer lab, again, because the person on that wall seat only has to crawl over one other person to get out. So in fact, if this were a computer lab, you would probably get all 12 seats in use. Whereas if this were your computer lab, students would be reluctant to go all the way to the far seat unless they just want to get away from everybody. But then other students are reluctant to take one of the seats next to them because you have to crawl over back and forth. So that if you have to use this room as a computer lab as well, you actually lose seats, even though they're still there. You can also do the aisles down the side. This is our larger room. Aisles down both sides. Your rows are only 4 wide. You do have people sitting in the middle, so you've got people sitting where they've got the prime view of the screen. We found in this room that the instructor will move up and from the front and down this side and can look at screens, but typically they won't go down the other side. Partly because we have a panel mounted on the wall that you hook a laptop onto to control your show, and it's on this lower wall here. So even with gyro mouses and stuff like that, the instructors tend to stay close to where the laptop is. But we found this room, while it's a training room, is also open when there's no training going on as a computer lab. And we find it to be the most popular space for students. I think because it's only 4 seats wide, it has that upper row wall is all windows. It's a very nice room. So that again, if you need both a training room and a computer lab, we found this design works out very well. Of course, you've got to have the space to have aisles on both sides. Another seating arrangement that we didn't use, they call this the herringbone, where you angle the seats. And what they're trying to get here is more interaction between the students. And again, those of you who were here yesterday and saw the video presentation from Suffolk Law School, where they're talking about how their classrooms are designed where the seats are in a U arrangement, because that way you have a lot of students facing each other, students can see each other very well, more interaction. So that goes back to what kind of training class do you want? Do you want the students talking to each other? More so than they normally do in a training class. Comments. I mean, what kind of training class do you want? Do you want, again, one where the instructor is completely in charge all the time? Or do you want to encourage more discussion and comment between and among the trainees? Comments?
Part of that issue is going to be, is your space exclusively available for training, or is it also got supported class with credit method? Maybe like a law class, in which case that's why Suffolk's situation more designed for a regular block.
Right, yeah, because I was talking about the classrooms there, but that was, again, the concept is that you want people to face somewhat so that they'll interact more. You want them to interact in a training session.
Well, you're training on
Yeah.
For tech training, you're always going with the least common denominator. So I would think that you want less interaction because you're always waiting for the slowest person. And if there's distraction by interaction, then that can really drag down the class. Unlike, a long class where you're trying to engage them in the dialogue.
The comment there, I guess I'm theoretically supposed to be repeating from recording, is that in a tech class, you're really training for the lowest common denominator because that's the person you've got to make sure that they're keeping up. And so you want to keep internal conversation down as much as possible so that the slowest person is able to keep up with the pace that you're setting on your front screens. Jordan?
I was sitting here, David, thinking about your first question when you started this, and your list of what you want to do with your training, which brings me back to, I guess I'm sitting here saying, why do you want a training lab for anything that you've got in your training lab?
Okay. So the question is, why a training lab?
Almost everything that you're talking about, couldn't they be web-based instructional programming that students can get self-trained on?
Okay. What about self-paced, web-based computer? Or again, like we heard in the keynote address this morning, just-in-time learning. Since I'm the one that the questions come to when they want the just-in-time learning, I want to eliminate as many of those as possible. And so that's why I'm interested in having a training class. Again, I'm looking at it from a somewhat selfish viewpoint of the person that's in charge of the computer lab.
Let's do an instance. You're training them how to get on the network and how to get their password, as an example, as a group training. Couldn't you set up a system that takes them through the steps, and then they get that and do it all on the computer so that they understand the steps, they get their password, and it's just a self-training, which they have to do themselves to get to the password?
Again, how much self-training can you do? I think that would be great. In fact, we have very extensive written materials to lead them through. And we find out that I would say at least 50% of the students cannot make it through that. As of yet, at least in Los Angeles, we have not found the high-tech law students yet.
Right. The observation on there is it's the same issue that you're training to the lowest common denominator. The students that can follow that kind of self-paced instruction, whether it's web-based or print-based or whatever, are not the ones who need to be in there getting training. They're the ones who can figure it out themselves. The problem that you've got and the reason that you do need a training room or program or something, some kind of setup for doing that, is for the guys that have the big red switch problem and can't figure out how to turn it on. And those are the ones that you got to worry about.
One of the things that we saw at the ABA conference that they talked about, which came from earlier, which is an engineering school, and I thought was really unique, but not something that you could do unless you plan the room in advance, was they had a situation where all the monitors faced the faculty member. So when the student was doing the work, the faculty member could look at what they were doing from there, so it was sort of shaped in a U shape or in that angled shape, but the monitors were faced towards the front of the room. And then when the faculty member wanted them to pay attention, they all had to sort of turn around and not be looking at their screens, and then that facilitated a different type of educational.
I've got a picture of a computer lab set up very similar to that. Actually, I did a program at CALI 2 years ago and talked about the U-shaped computer lab. Because again, just what you say, the idea is that the student, when they're working at the computer, they're facing this way, and the faculty member is here and can see the screen, and then they have to turn away from the computer, away from the keyboard, to see the faculty member. Again, it helps with the problem of people getting too far ahead. Actually, I asked our architect, our interior designer, to take on one of the smaller rooms. I said, okay, redo the furniture, let's put it in a U-shape around. First off, let's see if we get the same number of seats in there. Or if we get more, or we get less. And he came back to me and said, no, because the plans have always been drawn about where the holes are going to be drilled in the floor. And you can't change anything. So I'm thinking maybe in 2 or 3 years I'm going to run a wire mold around the outside of one of the rooms and actually at least do one room just arranged the way you said. Yeah.
One of the things that we did in a continuing education situation was put a third monitor in between two students, and that monitor was fed from the instructor's station so that I could be here at my computer and see what was being done on the instructor's computer just by looking between this lady and myself.
Okay, again, that's one of the options of,
No screen.
Yeah. Again, I'm talking, and what we went with was real heavy on the overhead projection. There are other options to overhead projection. Just as you said, one is you just have a monitor, and you could have several located around, and that's what people would look at.
No bad location in the classroom. Everybody can see.
Actually, when we were first laying this out, that's what I told the AV consultants that I wanted. I didn't want projectors. I wanted monitors, especially, I didn't point it out in the room, but you notice that this room, my main computer lab, has two walls that are glass, and the 24-student room has one whole wall that's glass. And I was saying, for light purposes, I would rather have CRT monitors because they're less sensitive to light, have them hung around at various places, and that way you can also, just as you said, no one on the back row is looking 6 rows all the way up to see the projector. If there's something closer. I think even if you notice in here, the picture on there, even though it's a camera, is brighter than the projected picture. But I was shot down totally on that because that's old-fashioned. We have another problem. At least I got through with the architects. The architects did lay out and actually worked out the idea of brackets from the ceiling, but they wouldn't put those over any of the workstations because they didn't want any of these monitors over somebody. In case of an earthquake, the monitor might come down, no matter how securely you had it within the bracket.
Ours were set on the table.
Yeah, so that's, well, we didn't come up with that
We
idea.
used to have table space, of course, but
Yeah.
I was just going to comment on your U-shaped classrooms. I taught in a U-shaped classroom where the computers faced each other, so the students actually faced each other, which meant that if I wanted to see what they were doing, I had to walk all the way around the perimeter, and that was not good. It also encouraged a lot of discussion that was not necessarily class-related among the
Yeah, because that
students.
way you got the students looking at each other.
Right. The other
Yeah, so you
side-
want them turned the other way.
Right. The other time I actually took a class where I was in a lab where I faced the wall, faced the computer and the instructor was behind me. I found it really distracting and hard to concentrate on what the instructor was saying as well as what I was doing. I wanted to be able to just glance up and get that reinforcement of seeing the head, the instructor talking.
Yeah.
So it was very difficult for me. Now, it may not be for everybody, but I found that to be a very uncomfortable way to try to
Yeah,
learn.
that's the problem I see with the U arrangement is that you're either looking at the instructor or you're working on the computer. And that's why I went with the straight rows, because I wanted the reinforcement of seeing what's on the screen and then seeing what's on your monitor.
I was just going to say we use, University of Alabama, we do Westlaw Lexus training in a U-shape, but it's only with 10 monitors. I don't think that would work well in a large room.
And actually, before our renovation, I had rearranged our Westlaw room into that arrangement. 5 monitors down one wall, 5 down the other.
We have
And-
3, 2, and 2.
And the Westlaw instructor loved it. And plus, the room had been arranged just in the regular rows, and it opened up the middle. It was a much more comfortable room. But we didn't do that in the new building. Okay,
We've got a pie-shaped lab going into our new building, and that's becoming a problem. What we ended up doing basically was throwing the computers against the wall, monitors basically up against the wall, so an instructor can see everything, and put a center aisle down there with computers facing each other, and basically you can walk around and see it. That would work in that lab setup too, right along the wall, giving you full view. Students can't watch the monitor while they watch the screen.
but again, that's what you've got to think about. Do you want the students to be not able to look at their computer and look at the screen, or to look at the screen? I think, again, there's arguments either way. It really depends upon what you want to do. Let's talk a little bit about training class size. There's an oft-stated rule of 1 to 10 ratio. one instructor for every 10 students. We used our 24-seat lab for Westlaw and Lexis trainings. That was one instructor for 24, and both the Westlaw and Lexis instructors loved it. They thought it worked very well. I think your students are at least motivated. They want to get on. We don't let them use Westlaw and Lexis until they have the training, and so they get real anxious. So they're interested in being in the training. Again, the instructors have a fairly canned set of what they're showing, so that they work this out all in advance, so that it flows pretty quickly. Again, I was talking about I want to use this for training on login and email. Obviously, I would go with a higher one because it would be augmented with the written instructions and simply the fact that some people will be able to get through that quickly and be through with, and then you can just concentrate on the ones that are having troubles. For ExamSoft this year, we had a problem with ExamSoft in the fall because a lot of students who thought they had downloaded and installed the program hadn't. And so we said, well, for the spring, if you intend to use ExamSoft, you have to come to a class. And an instructor will guide you through making sure that the program is installed. Well, so that was fine. We used a 24-seat room. People bring in your laptop, plug it in. A lot of our students don't have Ethernet cards. They just have a laptop. We don't have a requirement. So one of the things we said, if you don't have an Ethernet card, basically it was a 2-hour session. The first hour come early, and we will install your Ethernet card, put you on the network. Then the next hour is everyone goes to the website and downloads the software and runs it through. And we had a training ratio there of 4 instructors to the 24 students. 1 instructor and then 3 people roaming around getting the cards installed. And even at that was a disaster. Part of it was that you have non-uniform, we don't have a laptop requirement, so people have different types of laptops. Some of them took real well to 3-com Ethernet cards, some didn't. Some people we had to do other things to get them onto the internet. So we're not planning to do that again. Gordon?
Yeah, well, 2 questions. One is, you think about just using USB connector?
No. The other problem we have is that our law school does not use Internet Explorer. We use Netscape Navigator. You have to use Internet Explorer to go to the ExamSoft site. So students could not download the software on the computer lab computers if they had a zip disk, let's say, and then try to install it on there. So, I mean, there's other problems with that. Another experience I had, this was with a bunch of librarians. And presumably computer-savvy librarians. This was an internet training class, training the internet trainer. And we spent the morning session learning all sorts of things. And then the afternoon we would go to the computer lab. So there were 40 people. It was a computer lab with 20 workstations, so everyone doubled up. Well, that's your first problem because you're immediately talking with your neighbor. And there was 1 instructor. And she was able to get a few things out, but by then everyone was on their own, playing around, and it was pretty much, that hour was pretty much wasted unless you were doing it on your own. So even with what I call a mature class, 1 to 40 doesn't work. Was a comment over here? Now, how well is that showing up? Okay, this is the class, the picture I was talking about. It's not my training room. But see, this is very similar to the U arrangement. This is the instructor's workstation here at the front. And then, while you've got this center section where the instructor would have to move around to see, you can see the instructor from one location can see a lot of the screens. And then you've got your projection. You can see the projector up there. Up here, so the students turn one way to see the projector, or they can sit here and try that. But the instructor can see a lot of the screens from one location. Then, oftentimes, when you're coming up with a computer lab, you're having to deal with the space that's available. So here you've got what was a very wide room. So you've got 5 computers on each side with a center aisle. But use 2 projectors so that you've got the projection going down the middle. And then this one, you don't see too often in law schools, but what you've got here is sort of a group of 4 people that can be in one workstation. So if you're doing something that's more collaborative type training or sessions, this would work very well. Actually, what I would like something like this would be for the doing CALI exercises and doing the Practicing Law Institute CLE programs, where you would want people to be in a group to talk about things. But obviously, you wouldn't want that in a computer lab. You want that in a separate room so they can talk.
And there are both hardware and software solutions that let the instructor replicate the instructor's screen to the workstations, or pick a particular workstation or replicate around the room. I'm wondering if anybody here had actually been using it.
Yeah, now let's, okay. Experiences with that. You want
Not very good ones. We're constantly having troubles with it. We've actually gotten to the point that we can't even open it up to the lab.
Are you using a hardware solution?
It's called Robotel.
There's also one that's based exclusively on going over IP and just using the network.
Use NetMeeting. It's a Microsoft.
Right.
So it comes with a site license, and we find it very good and very useful where you want to show a lot of stuff quickly, but you don't have time or don't require hands-on.
How easy is it for the students then to switch from what you've been showing on their screen to doing it on their own?
Very easy. You just click on the start button.
Okay, that's what I was hoping.
What else you want.
Like I say,
But they don't know that at first. So
there are a lot of options to overhead projection. I don't know, for some reason we've really gotten into overhead projection. But certainly the idea of, instead of projecting it, you show it on their screen in front of them. That way you don't worry about height. You don't have to worry so much about the light in the room. Talking a bit more about lumens and stuff, but actually this is a pretty good projector. We've got all the lights on and you can still see here. That had always been one of the problems with projection, is that you really needed to get the room dark, which made it sort of difficult to do a classroom type of arrangement, where you had to, and once you left the computer, the room was too dark for anything else. But yeah, there are other options to using overhead projection. Again, back to, this is what the training room actually looks like in session. This was a small class, but had to get a picture of somebody in there. And so this is with all the lights on, and a very incompetent photographer, and still everything shows up pretty well. You can pretty well see the screen there. This has to do with one of the decisions we made. We bought the same projector for all 5 training areas. Now, the training area out in the main computer lab needed a 1200 lumen projector because it's got windows down 2 sides, so even with shades, you need a lot of light. And we just decided to get the same projector for all the locations, which means there's only one type of bulb to have in supply, and one set of instructions for people to learn. So the result is that in especially the smaller training rooms, in this training room, you can have a lot of light and still be able to see the projection. Okay. Moving along. Sort of, like I say, the impetus for me on thinking about doing something about this was, what are those people talking about? Lumens, CRT, LCD, VLP. Hopefully most people do your SVGA, XGA, SXGA sound somewhat familiar. Metal halide, UHP, what does all this stuff mean? Is it important? Some other terms that if we have time we'll go into, but again they'll be on the website that has all of this. Projectors. Okay. Lumens is a measure of the amount of light that the projector is putting out. Typically in the test I've been seeing, most projectors are fairly accurate. If it says it's a 1000 lumen projector, I've been reading tests of those, and generally the people testing are finding they are producing 1000 lumens. The question of what will you be projecting, some projectors are much better for video than for data. I think most of us are going to be more interested in projecting data than in video. How much control is there over the light in the training room? Again, this goes back to the amount of lumens that you need. Is it portable, like this one, or is it ceiling mounted? For those who are interested in terminology, there is something called keystoning, which you see an example of here. It's where the picture somewhat looks like a keystone, and that's because you're having to project it up. If you could have a permanently mounted projector so that it's shooting straight in, you wouldn't get to keystoning. Some projectors have special circuitry that can correct for keystoning. So that's, again, something that when you look at the spec sheet, someone's telling you about all the fancy things that this projector does. If you're going to be using a portable, you have to move to a lot of different rooms. Keystoning correction may be real important. If it's going to be permanently mounted on the ceiling, as long as you've got a competent installer, you don't have to worry about keystoning. Types of projector technology, you've got CRT, LCD, and then the latest is DLP. CRT is your TV set. Also, is anyone from USC here? Anyone have a barcode projector? The big old CRT triple beam barcode projector. At one time, that was it. And even now, CRT is considered better for video than the others. That's as always one of the criticisms of LCD. Your next step in development, liquid crystal display, is that it was nice and it was portable. You remember the old days? How many people have the LCD panel that you put over the overhead projector? Okay. Again, that was a big advance because it was much smaller than the big barcodes. Not much lumens, and especially if you don't have a real high light overhead, then your picture is fairly dull. Newest development is the digital light processing. It's about 4 years old now, I think. Originally, the DLP projectors, they were light, so that the portables, particularly the ones that the cell phone stuff to take around, that's where they first appeared. Generally, they were not considered to have, the color quality was not as good as what you got with an LCD or certainly not with a CRT. That's improved a lot. You're now seeing, and DLPs are also quieter and cooler. Again, so if you're talking about the portables, that means that the fan is much quieter, and so it's much better for that. But for an overhead, ceiling mounted, it wasn't quite necessary to go with that. But presumably DLP is the direction things are going in. You may be, I don't know if you're familiar with, but the motion picture industry wants theaters to switch to digital projection, and DLP is the technology that's being used for that. But we're talking about $100,000 projectors here. But still, that means that the development is going to be going into DLP, and so I think that's what you will be seeing primarily in the future as those move into, from primarily in the portables into the ceiling mounted and the large boardroom. Resolution, again, this is something to be relatively familiar with. What I was not aware of until I started reading on all this is that you need to match your laptop, if you're using a laptop, with your projector. If you've got an SVGA laptop, you need to make sure that your projector is SVGA. If it's an older projector that's only VGA, you can sort of dumb it down, but you lose a few things. Same way, if you've got an XGA projector, but you've got an SVA laptop, you're going to have, you have to either dumb down one way or the other, and you will often lose data. So it's important to think in terms of what are you going to be driving this projector with. Is it going to be a laptop? Is it going to be a permanently mounted computer? Because you don't have the same problem with desktop computers that you do with laptops. As it is, the system we went with was the idea that you have this little wall-mounted unit, and anyone who's doing a program can plug in their own laptop. That was the theory. What we found is that we also have a set of laptops that we use, and they're set up for those. and we found it's much easier to have people use our laptops than to bring their own laptop in. But that's something you consider when you're looking at a projector. If it's going to be powered by a laptop, what kind of laptops have you got? What kind of laptops are you going to have in the next several years? Also on resolution here, they will go even higher. I mentioned HDTV. Actually, HDTV is not a single resolution. There's, I think, 15 different resolutions for HDTV. But the reason I mention it is partly because there is not one standard. A digital television set is set so it can take a lot of different inputs, including computer. And as digital TV prices come down, just going out and buying a digital TV set may be an alternative to getting a large screen digital TV set, may be an alternative to a projection system. Because, like I say, they've already got the video input jack. Most of them will have the video input jack for computers. That's one thing to look for. A little bit about bulbs. Several of the things I've read have said that your bulb life, basically it's costing you $1 an hour to run your projector. So that's something you need to look at when you get the specs on a projector. How much does a replacement bulb cost? What is the expected bulb life? The other thing to consider is that if the bulb life is 1,000 hours, after 800 hours, how many lumens are you getting? Because the bulb may still be actually pumping stuff out, but it's not going to be pumping it out as high as it was when you first bought the new one. So in fact, you may need to replace more often. The typical bulb is going to be a metal halide. There's something called a UHP bulb, which is proprietary from Philips, runs cooler. So again, you'll see it more often in the portables, because in the portables you're looking for cooler, quieter. It runs longer, but it costs about twice as much. So hopefully it runs twice as long. Another thing is aspect ratio. Again, this has to do also with the development of HDTV. The typical aspect ratio for television, as well as projection, is 4:3. High definition television is 16:9. And I would expect that within the next several years, basically computers will be switching to 16:9. One thing, it certainly makes it easier when you're playing DVDs, because that's the aspect ratio for DVD. You can now use, let's say you can buy a plasma screen, hang it on the wall, and use that as your projection system. But it's going to be in the 16:9 aspect. Again, there are things you can do to your laptop to make it go to that aspect ratio. But that's, again, something, a term to consider is the aspect ratio. Like I say, I think that will change. Alternatives to projection, plasma screen, net. Again, as digital TV prices come down, I think it becomes more of a trade-off. This is showing a plasma screen doing just a plain old laptop projection. This plasma screen costs the same amount as the projector that you saw in my 24-student training room. And what I wanted to do was so you can compare the size here. It's probably about 1/4 the size, because there's the instructor right next to it. But again, as these prices come down, this becomes an alternative. Again, the main advantage over projection is that you don't have anything hanging off the ceiling now. It's a lot, as far as arranging the training room, you've got a lot more options rather than having to have the screen come down. Plus, you can show high definition television on this. You get the decoder. And then also I mentioned here on alternative projection, the individually controlled monitors, the software and hardware solutions that were mentioned earlier. The other thing is with digital television. Again, the criticism that was made of me when I said, let's just get these monitors and hang them around and forget this projection, was that, oh, that's old technology. I don't want old technology. Well, at least the new digital TVs, you can say new technology, but many of them will come or be available with the computer video inputs. And so they're right there available, and again, presumably digital TV prices will be dropping. And so I've got some more information here about screens. I didn't know there were so many screen types available. I just ordered the screen, whatever was suggested. Basically, there are some screens that are better for where you can view from all angles. Other screens, you need to be in a 60-degree angle, but you get a better picture. So again, it's a trade-off between if you've got a big wide room, you probably need to go with the matte white because it projects wide without loss of resolution. If you've got a fairly narrow room, you can get a much better look with the glass beaded, but you've got to make sure everyone is in this 60-degree angle. There's a couple of others. I don't think you need to worry about the AS1000. It meets the standards of Lucas THX, Spectra, and Pearlescent. And then, like I say, I've got just a bunch of terms. We've got 5 minutes left, so we'll go through all the terms unless someone has a real heady question. Like I say, this entry that will be on the CALI website, as well as all the information I'll have on my website, will have all these definitions. But let's get more questions, comments.
On the Sony projector we have, which is about 3 it's the bulb is blown twice in a year and a half, 2 years, and every time it has a huge puff of smoke. So people wonder, is that toxic?
Burning. Is it anyone know if it's a yeah, the CALI is not toxic.
We've always run out of the room.
You get any sort of warning. I mean, the projector I've got is a sharp, and supposedly a light comes on before the bulb is about to burn out. Or a little warning light. I don't know if you get if that. Oh, I haven't run it long enough to see if that's actually going to work or not. Any other questions?